Good morning. It's time for another data update. I'd like to do a national one first and then a local one that will talk about Washington State. I want to start off the national one by pointing out that, as you've noticed, this is a dark and hard time, especially if we're looking at the numbers of mortality. Numbers of mortality have gone up, especially in several big southern states. And that's included taking some voices that I have been aware of that have enriched my life in different places. On Twitter, Science Twitter has lost a voice in the person of... I honestly don't know about this person's particular situation. They were an archaeologist of some sort. They were a good scientist. You can tell just from the way that she talked. And she's an outspoken activist, and basically I'm at a loss for words for how to memorialize a voice that has been lost. This account was noted to have the person owning this account passed away just a day or two ago from COVID, had been infected, got better, then suddenly got worse. And as we know, that can happen. I personally know more than a dozen people who've been infected with it. Thankfully, none of them have died, but two of them have long-term implications. We don't know what those implications are. So this is a serious disease. What I want to show you is the national reflection of this. You see that the deaths have been going up. COVID tracking project, that line is going up, and some people are asking, when will it stop? Well, that's what the modeling sites that I've tried to keep track of over the last few months to find one that I trust, and so I'm going to tell you what that site has to say. It will stop going up eventually. We will stop losing unique voices to COVID at the rate at which we're seeing it right now. The other thing that you can see from this is you can go over to the next graph over. Remember that mortality is the later stage of what happens in the progression of the disease. Hospitalization is a precursor to it. And notice the hospitalization graph is going down. And so that's what I want to talk about. Nationally, we're at this place right now where we're seeing a lot of deaths. But we are seeing hospitalizations go down. Could this be real? Could this be sustained? It looks like from the data that the answer to both of those is yes. Although with everything else it is complex and qualified. This is what it looked like on July 18th. And I want to go through to what it looks like now. Let's start from the right. You have the deaths going up right there. But then you look at the blue, the one more to the left, you move over and you see that the hospitalizations are definitely going down. They're still very high, but there's a definite decrease that's happened. The other thing to look at is look back and forth. Testing has continued to increase. Cases are going up as well, but if you can see even on this graph, the orange cases graph is going down at a discernible rate over weeks that is not captured by what's going on in the testing line. In other words, the percent positive rate is actually improving. You might have noticed that you aren't getting the daily Twitter reminder that Florida has just set a new record for cases, because Florida is testing at about the same amount, but they are getting fewer cases. It's slow but a steady decline. And so this is reflected in the COVID projections model that I follow. And it's the purple line right here is newly infected, which should go with hospitalizations. And notice that according to this projection, we are past the peak of hospitalizations. That's reflected of, and it includes some input from the declining hospital line nationally. The national projections of mortality, so if we can take this as an accurate model that will project what's going on, this is what it looked like on July 18th. My question then was, will we see 500 or 2,000 deaths a day? Well, we are up to about a little above 1,000 deaths per day if you take the 7-day average. So we are right in the middle of that range right now. COVID projections says that it will probably go up, but for another week. It says that we're near the top. We shouldn't see an exponential increase in deaths, but we should see more of this same slope that we've seen, and then they will start to go down. That is what I can offer you today for what this projection is saying. What is the reason for why this death curve is so much lower than the original one? It's more geographically widespread, for one thing. So you would think there's more people to infect, there's more people that are infected, and there's as many people in the hospital, but we have fewer people dying. And the same modeler that gave the original ideas also tried to model what the infection fatality rate is. Very early on, this is what I guessed from South Korean data was around 0.7%, and that was very accurate for the April phase of this. Now with what we're seeing, one of the hardest things about this ratio is it's hard to detect infections. There's a lot of people that get infected that are asymptomatic or mild symptoms, may not even get tested, especially if testing is not ramped up the way it should be. So trying to figure out what this is why cases are you have to interpret case data when you see them. You can't just take raw case numbers. And this is a question I've been asking. Has our infection fatality rate been improving? My friends in hospitals say that it feels like it has. And here is the modeler that I'm referring to asking that exact same question, estimating it for different states that are hard hit right now. And you see that for all those states, it's definitely dropped by about 2/3. It used to be 0.7%, and now it's about 0.25. A little variation between states, but it's pretty accurate. It's more accurate now to say 0.25 than it was to say 0.7% earlier. So this is good news. It means remdesivir is working. It means convalescent plasma may be working. I'm not sure what's working. Something's working. And remember that this means that for every 400 people infected by COVID, whether detected or not, that's what this is trying to correct for, that one of them will die, and that's across all age ranges. Remember also that this disease has a very distinct age curve, where 70 plus, 80 plus have a much higher IFR than the ones who are below that. So I had these questions on July 18th for the next week. Is Arizona's drop real? Will Texas remain flat? Will Florida slow down? All three of these states are now dropping. I even said, will Florida slow down? Because I didn't think that Florida would start to drop. I was too pessimistic about Florida. How big will Louisiana's second bounce be? And that's something. So I want to update the graph that we had before, and I want to show you what it looks like now. This is July 18th's graph. You can see that barely you can see Arizona starting to go down. But you see Texas and Florida, they might be starting to flatten out. Here's the graph done the same way and what it looks like now. Now I don't have to zoom in to show you any of these drops actually. You can see the drop in all the big states, the ones in the upper corner of the graph. Just to remind you about this graph, northeast is bad, exponential growth. Down, straight down means, the opposite of exponential growth. It's dropping down exponentially. And what I like about this graph is you can have sort of a physical feel for how fast things are changing. It's not just is it going up or down, but what's the rate as what it's going up or down. But the important thing about all these different big states is they are going down. The other thing I want to point out is I always keep an eye on the local data, and the Washington data, again, it's going up, but it's going up at a rate that's similar to the other states that have gone up. It's not going up exponentially, it's going up linearly. And that means that it looks like there's some sort of immunological gravity or, epidemiological gravity that's going to take over and pull this down at some point. We've seen it again and again, and we've seen it in all these states. We're seeing it in the big infected states now. Let's zoom in a little more just to get a better look at what's going on. This is what was July 18th data. And this is what the data looks like now for these four big states. definitely a huge drop in Arizona. Its hospitals are at half the peak of what they were. And by the way, if you look at Texas's data, you see that weird little uptick. That's actually a data issue that inflated the hospital bed data for a little while. It obscured a drop in hospital beds. And so now we're back and we're seeing the hospital beds go down. We're seeing cases go down. We're seeing deaths go up. But again, that is what we model will be happening at this point. So this is in line with the projections that I've seen, and this is good news. The Florida projections are better than I expected, and Texas and California were about what I expected, and Arizona has continued to follow the gravity of the line pulling it down. 4 very different states. All that they have in common really is this virus and the fact that they were in the middle of an outbreak. Here's my July 18 things about what will happen if Texas and Florida follow Arizona's path. Well, like I've said, August 1st, it's actually looking better than I thought it would. Arizona hospitalizations are decidedly dropping, undisputably dropping. Texas is dropping, even with the data issues, like I said, appear to have obscured a drop earlier, about a week ago. Florida is dropping as quickly as Texas, and this is what my biggest surprise is. So I'm just happy to have been too pessimistic rather than too optimistic in the past. And I want to keep doing this. I want to keep pulling up my old slides and saying, okay, how does this affect what's going on now? So let's look at the smaller states that we can see. Remember, this is not corrected for population, so you also always have to say to yourselves what's going on with the population. But these are smaller states, so we're talking, 5 million to 15 million people in the state, rather than the 20 million plus that we have in the other states. And here's Arizona for comparison. Arizona, if I remember correctly, about 7 to 8 million people. Georgia has more people than Arizona, but you see that they've been dangerously close to Arizona's hospitalization peak. So not quite as bad as Arizona, but needs to come down. If you look at Georgia, it looks like they're flattening out. It looks like if they're following Arizona's pattern, then they are at their peak now. The other states I've been keeping an eye on have been Michigan, Louisiana, and Ohio. That's because they have all had outbreaks earlier in Detroit, New Orleans, and I'm not sure which city in Ohio had the outbreak earlier. It might have been more dispersed, but definitely there were higher hospitalizations. You can see that they've gone down and now they're bouncing up again. And one of my questions is, when you had an outbreak before, how big is the second bounce? Well, you can see that all of these bounces are less high. You can't see it as well for Ohio because the first bounce is obscured. They're as high or smaller as the first bounce in the first place. Louisiana in particular, I've been keeping an eye on. It's right in that belt of states that's been having outbreaks, so they have a genuine outbreak. But it looks like the second bounce is not as bad as the first. And you can think of this graph as having a sort of gravity to it that's pulling things down. I'm happy to say that even Michigan is showing a little tiny bounce, although I must say that Michigan's data appears to be reported only about twice a week rather than every day from the patterns in the data that I'm seeing. The other thing is to look at the other small southern states, because per capita, Mississippi is as infected as Florida, and you see that Mississippi has not turned down as much as Florida yet. In a sense, Mississippi is as bad or worse than Florida. In fact, if we do per capita, I project that they're probably about the same as Georgia right now. Many of these states that are geographically and demographically similar are going to be experiencing the virus in the same way. But that means that we can compare these and we can say, we can hope that if Arizona fell, then Georgia and Mississippi, a fall is out there rather than some sort of exponential growth phase. That's all I'm saying. For all I know, there could be some aspect to this virus that results in late exponential growth. I'm just saying that we haven't seen it in any of these places. And we are seeing bounces, but the bounces we're seeing are lesser than the first attacks. The only question I have is for a state like Washington that's so low that the first bounce was, you could make an argument that the first bounce was effectively suppressed. what happens in that case? I'm not sure, but I can point out, notice how much lower Washington is in the Seahawks colors in the very bottom of this graph than all the other states. And Washington is about an average population. It has more population than most of those other states that we have. In fact, if I'm looking at it, North Carolina and Ohio and maybe Michigan have more population, but all the other ones on this graph are distinctly smaller than Washington. Well, Georgia has more people. Okay, they're about the same size. Okay, so I really should get these numbers, but it's hard to calculate this hospital number per capita because of the nature of the number and things like that. But you can still estimate, you can say Washington has a low amount of per capita hospitalizations. So if trends continue, this is saying that nationally the hospital line should continue to go down. There are several small southern states that may have yet to peak, but hopefully they are getting close to the peak by now. The one place I don't really know is North Carolina. Per capita, they are low, but they also haven't really peaked or slowed down. They're just showing this linear growth. So what I can say is hospitals have been extremely stressed, but because of the therapies that we've developed and the increase in treatments that we've done, that's brought the IFR down from 0.7 to 0.25. Again, that's a modeling projection, but it has the ring of truth to me. The hospitals are enduring. And I know from my friends in Florida hospitals that the Florida hospitals are getting through this, and it looks like they're dropping now. So the deaths will peak in mid-August. So my question is, what happens to Washington and North Carolina are abnormal on the low end? I'm not sure I can use Arizona's path as something for Washington, but I can also say I think that Arizona is the worst case scenario for Washington right now. If anything, it will be better. I'm going to talk about Washington in the next video in a little more detail. So remember, the other thing to remember is, with the exception of those 3 bounce states that I showed you, this is all first wave. This is all the first time that the big wave of infections has really hit these states. Again, California is an exception because California is like multiple states rolled into one. But Florida, Texas, they're getting hit for the first time. What will there be like when these come down and then there's another outbreak on the statewide level? How will it relate? That's why I want to look at these bounce states. The one thing I can say is that bounce appears to be smaller than the original infection wave. If that is true, then that could give hope for the future, and that may even apply to the feared winter bounce that we're seeing, what people would really call the second wave. We don't know until we get to the winter. But what I'm saying here is, from what we know, this is the case, and it's really bad right now with one of our 3 sets of data. But the other sets of data are improving, and that implies that mortality will eventually improve as well. Let's pray that it improves quickly, because I am tired of being shocked at a voice being taken away that enriched my life. And that's happening. So let's hope that things will continue to follow these, and I will check in a week or 2 with hopefully the curves being followed. Okay, that's all I want to say for nationally. I'm going to do another one for my friends in Washington.